Look at this. The truth.
There is a particular kind of silence that a room goes to when it realizes it has been wrong about someone for a very long time. Not the silence of shock exactly. Not the silence of embarrassment exactly. Something between the two, heavier than either. The silence of people who are recalculating everything they thought they knew about a person they dismissed, a person they talked about at dinner tables, a person they called a nobody to her face and behind her back for so long that the words started to feel like her name. That silence fell in a room in Atlanta, Georgia, on a Saturday afternoon in October when a woman named Sandra, who had been called a nobody by her husband's entire family for 14 years, walked into a family gathering and placed 3 documents on the dining room table. She did not say anything. She did not need to. The documents said everything. And by the time the last person in that room had finished reading, not one of them had a single word left. Stay with me, because the story of what Sandra built in silence over 14 years while family dismissed her is the story that every woman who has ever been underestimated deserves to be told properly. And we're going to tell it properly today. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We would love to hear from you. And if you're not already subscribed to Behind the Lie, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Now, let us go back to the beginning, because to understand what those 3 documents said and why they landed with the specific weight that they did in that room in Atlanta on that October afternoon, you need to understand the 14 years that preceded them. You need to understand who Sandra was when she walked into that family for the first time, and what that family decided about her in the first 30 minutes, and how they spent the following 14 years acting on that decision with the particular consistency of people who have never been given a reason to revise an opinion they formed quickly and held without examination. You also need to understand what Sandra was doing during all of those years. Because while the family was busy deciding who she was, Sandra was busy becoming something else entirely. And the distance between the person they thought she was and the person she had actually become is the full length of this story. Sandra was 31 years old when she married a man named Thomas. She had grown up in a working-class neighborhood in Macon, Georgia, the only child of a mother who worked as a seamstress and a father who had left when she was 7 and had not been a consistent presence in her life since. She had grown up with the particular self-reliance of children who learn early that the adults around them have limited capacity and that the gap between what is needed and what is available is something you either learn to fill yourself or you learn to go without. She had filled it herself consistently and without complaint, which had produced by the time she was in her early 20s a woman who was resourceful and observant and extremely skilled at doing a great deal with very little, which are not qualities that announce themselves loudly in social settings, but which are the qualities that build things over time in ways that louder qualities rarely do. She had attended 2 years of community college in Macon before financial reality had required her to stop and work full-time. She had worked as an administrative assistant at a small insurance office for 4 years. She had saved money with the focused discipline of someone who understood that save money was the only form of freedom available to a person who did not come from a family with resources. She was not glamorous. She was not connected. She did not have a degree from a name-brand university or a family with a legacy or a professional network that opened doors. What she had was herself, completely and without apology, and she had found, over the years before she met Thomas, that herself was more than sufficient for everything she had needed to do. Thomas was 34 years old when they met, the second of 3 sons in a family that had built a moderately successful commercial real estate business in Atlanta over 2 generations, and that had the particular confidence of families who have been comfortable for long enough that they have begun to confuse the comfort with the consequence of their own qualities rather than with the circumstances and decisions and fortune that actually produced it. Thomas was warm and funny and had a way of making people feel interesting that Sandra had found. When she encountered it for the first time at a mutual friends gathering in Macon, entirely unlike anything she had experienced before. He had pursued her with the genuine enthusiasm of a man who was attracted not by the things that his family valued and the women they approved of, but by the specific quality of Sandra's self-possession. The way she spoke only when she had something to say and listened with the full attention of someone who actually intended to use what they heard. He had driven from Atlanta to Macon 6 times in 2 months before he asked her to come to Atlanta to meet his family. She had gone, and the family had formed their opinion in approximately 30 minutes and had never substantially revised it in the 14 years that followed. Thomas's mother was a woman named Beverly. She was 68 years old at the time of the Saturday afternoon in October, and she had been the matriarch of the family in the complete and uncontested sense of that word since the death of Thomas's father 12 years earlier. She was not a cruel woman in the way that people who enjoy cruelty are cruel. She was something more complicated and in some ways more damaging than that. She was a woman who had a precise and detailed picture of what was appropriate for her family, built over a lifetime of living inside a particular social and economic stratum of Atlanta's Black professional community, and who expressed her disapproval of what did not meet that picture not through dramatic confrontation, but through the accumulated texture of small, consistent signals that communicated, to anyone paying attention, exactly where they stood. Sandra had paid attention from the first meeting. She had understood within that first 30 minutes exactly where she stood. She had understood that Beverly looked at her and saw a woman from Macon with a community college background and an administrative job and no family name that meant anything in the rooms Beverly moved through, and that this assessment had been completed and filed and would inform every subsequent interaction they would ever have. Sandra had not argued with this assessment. She had not performed for Beverly's approval or campaigned for a revision of the verdict. She had simply continued being herself, which was the most threatening thing she could have done, because Beverly had expected either deference or overreach, and Sandra had given her neither. The family's nickname for Sandra was not something any of them said to Thomas directly, at least not in the early years. It was the nickname that circulates in the side conversations and the phone calls and the WhatsApp group chats that exist in families where the primary communication channel is used for performance and the secondary channels are used for truth. The nickname was not a single word. It was a phrase. They called her Thomas's charity case. Not because Sandra had ever needed Thomas's charity, because she had not. She had been entirely self-supporting when they met, and had continued to contribute to their household in every practical way throughout the marriage. They called her that because it was the most efficient way to communicate Beverly's original assessment, which was that Thomas had reached below his station and that the woman he had married was a project rather than a partner. Sandra knew about the phrase. She had known for 11 of the 14 years they had been married. She had found out through a cousin of Thomas's who had a conscience and who had told her over coffee one afternoon that she thought Sandra deserved to know what was being said. Sandra had thanked her. She had driven home. She had sat in the driveway for a while. And then she had gone inside and made dinner and not said anything to Thomas. Not because she was afraid of the conversation, but because she had already, by that point, been doing what she was doing for 3 years, and she understood that the conversation that would matter was not the one she could have with Thomas that evening, but the one she was going to have with everyone at once when the time was right. What Sandra had been doing for 3 years at the point she found out about the nickname, and what she had continued doing for the following 8 years, was building a business. Not loudly, not with announcements or celebrations, or the kind of social media presence that turns a business journey into a performance. Quietly, in the same way she did everything, which was with the focused attention of someone who has limited resources and no margin for wasted effort, and who therefore does not waste any. The business had started from a skill she had developed watching her mother sew, a skill she had built on over years of making and altering her own clothes because she could not always afford to buy them, a skill that had evolved through practice and study and the particular obsessive interest of someone who has found the thing they are genuinely good at and has followed it wherever it leads. She had started making custom clothing for women in her neighborhood. Then for women her clients knew. Then for a bridal party. Then for 3 bridal parties in the same season. Then for a boutique owner in Atlanta who had seen a dress Sandra had made and asked who the designer was. Then for 2 boutique owners. She had registered the business in her own name in the 4th year of her marriage, using the savings she had been accumulating since before she and Thomas had met. Money she had kept in her own account, not as a secret exactly, but as the kind of private resource that a woman who has learned self-reliance keeps, because she understands that self-reliance requires infrastructure. Thomas knew about sewing. He knew she did custom work. He did not know the scale of what it had become, because Sandra had never announced the scale. And in a marriage where one person is running a family business that requires constant attention and the other person is building something quietly in a studio space she had rented in her 3rd year of building it, the person building quietly can go very far without anyone in the household fully registering the distance covered. By the end of the 7th year of building, Sandra's business had a name, a registered trademark, a client list of over 300 women in the Atlanta metro area, and an annual revenue that would have surprised everyone in Thomas's family significantly. By the end of the 10th year, she had 3 employees, a studio that had outgrown its original space twice, a feature in a regional lifestyle magazine that had brought in 60 new clients in a single month, and a financial picture that her accountant had described in their annual review meeting as extraordinary given the trajectory and the time frame. She had also, in the 11th year, been approached by a buyer interested in a minority stake in the business in exchange for growth capital that would allow her to expand into a second market. She had spent 4 months evaluating the offer. She had consulted with her accountant and with a business attorney. She had made the decision that her own assessment and her advisor's assessment supported. She had taken the investment. The capital had allowed her to open a second studio in a different part of Atlanta and to hire 3 additional staff members. By the 14th year, Sandra's business was a recognized name in Atlanta's bridal and occasion wear market, with 2 studios, 11 employees, a wait list for new clients, an evaluation that her accountant had prepared for her in a formal document as part of her annual financial review. That document was one of the 3 she placed on the dining room table on the Saturday afternoon in October. The occasion for the family gathering was Beverly's 70th birthday. It was a large gathering, the kind that Beverly's family organized with the thoroughness and attention to detail of people for whom social events are both pleasure and performance. There were approximately 40 people in Beverly's house that afternoon. Family members and longtime family friends and neighbors who had known Beverly for decades. Thomas was there. His brothers were there with their families. The extended family had come from various parts of Georgia and beyond. It was exactly the kind of gathering that Sandra had attended for 14 years, in which she had been present and capable and entirely herself, and had been treated consistently and without variation as someone who was there because Thomas had brought her rather than because she was someone who belonged there in her own right. She had attended every one of those gatherings. She had been gracious to everyone. She had brought food and remembered birthdays and engaged with the children and done all of the things that a person does when they are committed to a family that has not fully committed to them, because her commitment was not to Beverly's approval, but to her marriage and to the people in the family who had, over 14 years, treated her with the basic human decency that should have been universal and was not. She had waited for the right moment. Beverly's 70th birthday, in a room with every significant member of the family present, was the right moment. She had told Thomas 2 weeks before the gathering that she had something she wanted to share with his family and that she would like to do it at the birthday celebration. Thomas had asked her what she wanted to share. She had told him she wanted to share something about her work and that she thought the family deserved to know more about what she had built. Thomas, who had been aware in a general way that Sandra's business was doing well without having ever asked the specific questions that would have told him exactly how well, had agreed that the gathering would be an appropriate occasion. He did not know what the documents contained. He found out at the same time as everyone else. Sandra had made that decision deliberately, not to blindside Thomas or to make him feel excluded, but because she understood that the impact of what she was about to share required it to arrive to everyone simultaneously and without prior filtering through anyone else's interpretation. She had trusted her own judgment about the timing and the setting for 14 years. She trusted it on this one, too. She stood up after Beverly had cut the cake and the room had settled into the comfortable fullness of a celebration that has reached its natural plateau. She thanked everyone for being there. She said she wanted to take a few minutes to share something with the family because she believed that family deserved honesty and because she had something she had been building for 11 years that she thought it was time for them to know about properly. She opened her bag. She placed the first document on the table. It was a copy of her business registration, showing the founding date, the registered name, and her name as the sole founder and owner. She placed the second document beside it. It was the feature article from the regional lifestyle magazine, which included a full profile of the business, its growth trajectory, its client base, and Sandra's story as its founder. She placed the third document on the table. It was the valuation summary her accountant had prepared, a single page with her business name at the top and a number at the bottom that represented what 11 years of quiet focus building had produced. She did not say what the number was aloud. She did not need to. The document was clear, and the room was quiet, and the people closest to the table were already reading. The silence that followed was not immediate. It built. The way a silence builds when information travels through a room in real time. When one person reads something and their expression changes, and the person beside them notices the change and leans over to look, and their expression changes, and the information moves outward through the room in a wave of revised understanding that reaches each person at a slightly different moment and produces, in aggregate, the particular collective silence of a room that has just been required to fundamentally recalculate something it believed it knew. Beverly was the third person to read the valuation document. She had been handed it by her eldest son, who had been handed it by the person beside him, who had received it from the table. She read it twice. She looked up at Sandra. Sandra was standing at the end of the table with the composed stillness of a woman who has been waiting for this moment for a long time and who is now inside it and is finding it to be exactly what she had understood it would be. Beverly did not speak. For the first time in 14 years of family gatherings, Beverly did not have a word to say. Thomas read the documents after Beverly. He has said in the weeks since that reading them in that room with his family around him was one of the most complex experiences of his life, because what he was reading was not just the account of successful business, but the account of 11 years of his wife's interior life that he had not been fully present to. Not because Sandra had hidden it from him, but because he had not asked the right questions and had not looked closely enough at what was in front of him. He has said that the pride he felt was genuine and immediate, and that it arrived simultaneously with the recognition that he had, in his own way and for his own reasons, been as guilty of underestimating Sandra as his family had been, though he had expressed it differently, through insufficient attention rather than through active dismissal. He has said that the conversation he and Sandra had that evening after the gathering ended was the most honest conversation of their marriage. Sandra has confirmed this. She has said that it was the conversation she had been building toward for 11 years, not through strategy or calculation, but through the accumulation of everything she had done and everything she had not said and everything she had chosen to demonstrate through her work rather than to announce through her words. Beverly called Sandra 2 days after the gathering. The call lasted 40 minutes. What was said in that call belongs to the two of them and has not been shared publicly in full. What Sandra has said about it is this. She said Beverly apologized, not with the practiced smoothness of a woman managing a situation, but with the particular difficulty of a person who has held a position for a very long time and is revising it for the first time and is finding the revision uncomfortable and necessary in equal measure. Sandra said she accepted the apology. Not because 14 years of being called a charity case had been erased by a 40-minute phone call, because it had not been, and she was not going to pretend otherwise. but because she had not built what she had built in order to carry bitterness into the next 14 years. She had built it because building was what she did, and because the work itself had been the answer to everything that had been said about her, and because she had understood from the beginning that the most powerful response to being underestimated was not to argue with the estimation, but to outlive it. She had outlived it. The documents on the table had been the evidence, and the silence that had followed them had been the only acknowledgement she had ever needed. The story of what Sandra built has circulated widely in the months since that October afternoon, shared in the particular way that stories circulate when they touch something that enormous numbers of people recognize as personally relevant. The women who have shared it most widely are women who know what it is to be assessed quickly and incorrectly and to carry that incorrect assessment in rooms where they cannot fully escape it. They share it because it gives them something that most of the stories they encounter do not give them. It gives them a picture of what the long game looks like when a woman plays it without anger and without announcement, and without ever requiring the people who underestimated her to acknowledge what they were doing until the moment she chose to show them. It gives them a picture of patience that is not passive, of silence that is not surrender, of a woman who understood, before anyone else in the room understood it, that the most powerful version of herself was not the version that argued, but the version that built, and that the building, done with sufficient care and sufficient time, would eventually produce a moment that required no argument at all. That moment arrived on a Saturday afternoon in October in Atlanta, Georgia, with 3 documents and a silence that said everything that 14 years of words had failed to say. So here is what I want to leave you with today. There's a question that Sandra's story places in front of every person who hears it, and it is a question worth sitting with. What are you building right now that the people who have underestimated you do not know about? Not because you are hiding it from them, but because you understand the way Sandra understood that the building is the answer and the work is the argument, and the day the documents go on the table, if that day ever comes, will speak for itself in a language that is impossible to dismiss. You do not owe anyone a preview of what you are becoming. You do not owe anyone a defense of what you are worth. You owe yourself the focused attention and the sustained effort and the willingness to go quietly about the business of becoming everything you already knew you were capable of becoming, for as long as it takes, in whatever room they have placed you in. That is what Sandra did, and the room went silent. Tell me in the comments what you think. I read every single one. And subscribe to Behind the Lie and turn on that notification bell, because next time on this channel, we are going into the story of a woman who built everything her husband had while he stood in front of the world and took the credit and called her nothing. She said nothing for years. She kept building. And when he finally found out what she had been running in secret the entire time, he lost everything in a single day. We will see you there.